Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast, a special episode in some regards because we are coming at you in a different day and time than normal, Monday evening for this week. And really, my co-host John Sheeran and I, we both we'll divulge the secret. We're both going on vacation this week, and we said, maybe we'll take the week off, and we don't need a show. And then we kind of said, well, let's do a short one, because we love you guys. We got to give the listeners what they want. So we tried to get something going, a small show, that sort of thing, maybe just kind of keep it light. And then, of course, Monday morning, big news occurs, and we will be talking about that with Clint Boling, of course, along with potential breakout players. We may even open up the phone lines, time permitting, at the end of the program if we are able. But we've got a lot to talk about in a short period of time. I'm Anthony Cosenza. As I mentioned, this is the Orange and Black Insider. He's John Sheeran. John, how's it going today, bud?
It's going great. I spent the entire day moving into a new room in my house, and because of that, I am now able to introduce all of our listeners, specifically on the YouTube feed, to my good friend Randall back there. Randall is a skeleton. He has one limb, his right arm, and he's been living in our house for 2 years. And honestly, I thought he would be perfect to put in the backdrop because he is the perfect representation of me through about 7 weeks of any Bengals season. Just completely dead. He doesn't talk, but his mouth is always open. He's always shocked at anything that the Bengals do because they're just crazy. And he's going to be my partner in crime here in Sheeran Studios here in Clifton, Ohio. So welcome Randall to the show, and he's got a busy episode to catch up on right here.
Yeah, so Randall's trial by fire. He looks like he maybe has been too close to some fires, but it's a very good way to put it in terms of how you look. Maybe 7 weeks into a Bengals season, you're missing limbs. You've got the glasses on because you can't believe what you're seeing. Yet you got the Bengals on the mind. I like it, John. And welcome, Randall. We love you, buddy. You're part of the crew now. So if Randall disappears, do we need to be concerned if he randomly just isn't in the background on some episodes?
Yeah, he might have moved on to another podcast, and that obviously wouldn't be good. So, well, I'll try to keep him reeled in here.
Awesome. Well, let's kind of just go right at it. We're going to talk about this Clint Boling retirement thing from a couple of different angles. I guess the first being, and the most obvious, is are you surprised? Is this something that surprises you? I mean, I guess there's the cynical point of view that says, well, of course, he hasn't practiced all year, and it's the Bengals. They already lost Jonah Williams, so of course they're going to lose this guy. But there's also kind of the deal, well, maybe we kind of thought maybe he's just resting during these practices that don't really matter, and then he's going to come back when it matters and help this offensive line. Regardless, he's retiring. Real quick, before I get to your thoughts, John, congratulations on a good career to Clint Boling, because I think, yes. 8 years, solid player, never a star in the league, but a solid player, and obviously playing an unsung position, moved around on the offensive line. So congratulations to Clint Boling. But were you surprised at this announcement and when it came?
No, not necessarily. I think the only real news here was what the injury actually was. And for any other average 30-year-old male, a blood clot is a very serious issue. But when we think about football players, they think, oh, they can just walk back from it. But no, blood clot is a very serious issue. And I think he said himself, when you're playing a sport, when you're ramming into people 75 times a game, it's probably not the best environment for a condition like that. So first and foremost, here's to him having a happy and healthy retirement. He's a husband, he's a father. By all accounts, he's a great man. But no, I think this was, like you said, at first we kind of thought that this could be a situation where he's dealing with a minor injury. There's no reason to brush him down into OTAs to potentially make the situation worse. Then as it just kind of dragged on, and Jonah was out, and there was movement on the offensive line, you're thinking, okay, if he's not back by now, it might be a little bit more serious. And then there was that rumblings about him just being done, and we just weren't sure what type of injury that was, because by all accounts, he was slightly regressing last season, but ultimately it didn't look like he was playing hurt by any means. It was just him naturally aging. But he said he just discovered that issue right after the season ended, or right towards the end of the season. So he's been dealing with it for 7 months. and had surgery on it and been recovering about it. And if he just couldn't go, then he couldn't go. And there was no reason why the Bengals would keep him on the roster if he wasn't himself comfortable playing. So kudos to him for realizing the severity of the issue, taking action from it, and not making it any worse than it already is. But yeah, I think as soon as enough time passed where he just wasn't out there and there wasn't any official word coming from the team, you had to think it was more serious than originally we thought it was. And the kind of longer it went on, it was just a matter of when, not if he gets cut or retired. In this case, it was the latter.
Do you think that the Bengals had, and Zach Taylor jumping into this kind of, it's now becoming a trial by fire for him all of a sudden, but do you think that the Bengals had a good sense as to what was going on with him throughout the spring? And I say that because they drafted Michael Jordan, they bring in John Jerry, they bring in John. Now John Miller is going to set to be the right guard, but they bring in these slew of guards, right?
Yeah.
They bring back Trey Hopkins, they bring back Alex Redmond. Do you think that all of a sudden now you go, okay, that's why they did that? Or is that just simply stockpiling an offensive line that needs as much help as it can get?
I think it can be both, because they re-signed Bobby Hart, they draft Jonah Williams, like you said, they signed John Miller, they brought back Alex Redmond, all these bodies coming in. At one point they had, when we assumed that Clint Boling was going to be healthy, like 16 or 15 guys in training camp, and you're thinking, okay, the offensive line was a weakness, but now this is just hoarding bodies to a point where, some of these guys are just not being able to get significant practice reps. So yeah, I think, with how these moves are made, the timeline of when these moves were made, and the timeline of when Bowling first discovered this issue, I think they had a pretty good idea right around, I guess, when Zach Taylor was hired and when he was filling out his coaching staff and when he brought in Jim Turner. And then Jim Turner obviously had influence in bringing in guys on the offensive line. So I think they did have a good sense that this could be a potentially serious issue. We need to have contingency plans. And obviously, the Trey Hopkins is another guy that they brought back, and obviously like Christian Westerman, specifically at the left guard spot. So those two guys were already on the roster, already on the team, able to make a potential contribution at that position. So I do think it was a little bit of both, where this was obviously still a unit that's pretty bad compared to the rest of the league, needs as much help as possible. But this is potentially losing your long-term starter, your one staple at the position that has seen no controversy over the better portion of a decade, and has had one of the most underrated players in the NFL, and will probably go down in my mind as one of the better offensive linemen in recent Bengals history, if not all of Bengals history. So when you're dealing with a situation that dire, I think you just got to take all measures into account. That's exactly what they did.
Yeah, for Clint Boling, I mean, you go back to his draft, really his career in college, and he rarely is a guy that you draft, especially in the fourth round. Rarely is a guy come out, then you get him and he comes as advertised. In college, he played a number of spots on the offensive line. He did the same, again, largely left guard with the Bengals. That's not in dispute. But when they asked him to go kick out to tackle, he did it. When he moved, he's moved around a lot. And I think it was 112 career starts that he had for the team around the offensive line. Really started to latch on as the true starter at left guard in the 2012 season, suited up for 3 of those 5 playoff games. So, in that run of the 5 straight there. So kudos to him on a good career, and he will be missed. But you kind of said this in a tweet, and this is kind of a little bit of a debate that'll ensue between you and I guess. But you said this on Twitter. You said this before we took the air here. There may be a more positive spin on this than the doom and gloom that came with Jonah Williams, especially, and his missing of the 2019 season. Now, unfortunately, when I think it's been like 3 or 4 weeks. In a matter of 3 or 4 weeks, the Bengals lose 2 of their top offensive linemen, and not only for the year but for good, with Bowling. And you kind of, you sit here and what do they do next? But you kind of had a little bit more of a positive spin on this news, and I think not only myself but our listeners would like to hear kind of your approach on that.
Yeah, and when we first discussed, the possibility of Bowling not being retired but being a cap casualty, was what the implications long-term wise would be for that. And my whole thing was that if you're confident that Christian Westerman is some type of guard that you're comfortable with starting, and he's got 1 year left on his deal, and you benched him for 3 years, you only played him 183 snaps, and from what we could tell, his relationship with the past coaching staff wasn't very strong, and they didn't really trust him to play in games. So you got to think that this could be potentially another Evan Mathis situation, and the only way to solve that solution right now is to give him the chance to start and to start him for a year. So then you can, have the relationship back in good faith where you can potentially extend him to some type of long-term extension, especially for cheap, because he would only start a year. And that would only happen if you basically got Clint Boling out the picture, because you're going to start John Miller at right guard. You're going to start Billy Price at center. Left guard is basically the only potential spot that would open up. And again, you're originally talking about that as a cap casualty for Boling. But now that Bowling is officially out of the picture, you have zero excuse to not see what Christian Westerman is worth at that position. His only competition is John Jerry, who was retired for last year, and then Trey Hopkins, who you would hopefully like to keep on the bench as that versatile backup at all three spots. So I think long-term, if you give Westerman a year to start, basically go through the ups and downs of what comes with that territory, and then are comfortable with going for him long term in the next 3 or 4 years with some type of an extension, I think this can be very good and look as a positive. Whereas if you had Clint Boling starting at left guard, you had Westerman on the bench at left guard and right guard, then you potentially lose him to another team. He does very well, again, like an Evan Mathis situation. And then Boling becomes a free agent. You don't want to really pay him for another contract because he's going to be 31 years old at the time. Then you're stuck looking at another hole on the offensive line, trying to find another body to fill that position. So I think if there is a positive, that is the positive here. And it only works out if Christian Westerman is the type of player that we think he is. And if it works out, great. And if it doesn't, I guess you're back to where you would be if you had started Clint Boling left guard and bench Christian Westerman.
So I agree and I disagree with you. I agree with the fact that there is some good to come out of it in the form of, hey, he may never, and obviously based on what the diagnosis was, he may never have been healthy. So then you're sitting there kind of waiting for him to, come into the lineup and play, and you're relying on a guy that really, never happens for them. And, you're behind the 8 ball, so to speak. And so I guess to kind of speak to the obvious point, it's better to know now, I suppose, than further down the line and be relying on him. And now you can kind of try some guys out, but I just look at this as there are parts of it that say it's a bigger blow than losing Jonah Williams to me, and there are parts of it that are kind of on par with it. Obviously a left tackle and losing your first round pick, you're basically a top 10 pick in his rookie year is devastating. But and if you compare losing and you have a left tackle on the roster, so that's a plus in terms of Cordy Glenn, so you can potentially shuffle him over. Left guard, not as big of a premium position. I get all of that, but I guess I look at the leadership factor. I look at the versatility factor. I look at all of the things that Clint Boling brought to the Bengals, and in such a critical year where the Bengals are trying to bridge the transition into a possible playoff type of season, as unlikely as it may be for some folks to grasp, but he would be a guy that you would think, a young first-time head coach coming in, and he needs this core group of players to really say, look, we're all kind of in this boat together. We're all kind of, a lot of us are trying to get our feet under us, trying to, get this thing off and running instead of getting off to a slow start, that sort of thing. And usually you hear stories about coaches latching on to some of those veterans, some of those locker room leaders, quote unquote, that Boling seemed to, he was a captain last year. He had
right.
So you lose a guy like that. It's not just really the on-field talent. It's just kind of the, you kind of kick out a leg from under Zach Taylor, so to speak, as he's trying to get what he's building and create this thing. So to me, that's where this really hurts. And I guess if you want to talk about the on-field stuff, there's really like I said, the versatility factor is just it can't be understated. Where if the Bengals were to suffer, and if Cordy Glenn were to miss a couple of games, technically Clint Boling could slide over to left tackle. He could fill in at right tackle if Bobby Hart struggles or gets hurt. There's just he was just kind of a catch-all safety net type of player, a very steady player, as we've mentioned, and to lose that, I think the most unhappy guy about this news today may not be Clint Boling, it may be Zach Taylor.
That makes a lot of sense because say the starting five is Glenn, Westerman, Price, Miller, Hart. Glenn is by far the oldest of that group, and he's not even 30 years old until like week 2 of the season. Like Westerman's 26, Price is 24, Miller I think is 25 or 26. Hart is still pretty young for being 5 years in the league, 24, 25 years old. So there's experience with those guys, but the age factor is still very young, and it becomes, I think, one of the youngest offensive lines in the league. Bowling was the oldest of that group and has been, as a member of this offense, has been with them since Andy Dalton and AJ Green first came into the league. And yeah, losing that veteran presence is definitely potentially devastating. And, from that intangible standpoint, I do agree with you with that. But I think very rarely do the Bengals kind of luck into these situations. But I think it's fair to say that we've seen the best of Bowling as a player. And even if he was healthy, I think he would have been getting worse before he was going to reach another sort of peak, if you will. I think we saw the best of him towards the latter years of those playoff runs, and you're still kind of holding it together through 2016, 2017. But God, I can't even imagine how draining it was to be a part of those offensive lines from 2016 to 2017, and how he was literally just doing anything that he could to keep it afloat. I remember just rewatching those games and that tape, and just thinking, Bowling's doing his job, the other 4 guys are just not, and how mentally draining that was on him, maybe even physically draining. He was just asked to do a lot more. So maybe had the offensive line not fallen apart so drastically towards the end of Bowling's career, maybe we still would have seen better effectiveness out of him in these last couple of years. But I do think that we were starting to see the beginning of the decline for Bowling, and unfortunately, sometimes it's better to get off the train earlier than later.
Here's food for thought based on what you were just saying there, John. There was a point in Clint Boling's career where on the offensive line, he was sandwiched by Russell Bodine and Cedric Aboihi.
Hell.
So
absolute hell.
I mean, think about that for a second, and think about how few times his name was called for mistakes and all that kind of stuff, and how much worse would those 2 players have been? How much more would they have, their mistakes have been spotlighted had Clint Boling not been there to potentially, help double team guys, help out with it, call assignments, all that kind of stuff. So, I mean, I think from that aspect, you look at his career, you look at what he has done for the Bengals, and like you said, when that line kind of fell apart, and that's where he was, that's where he was stationed and who he was stationed next to. Oh boy. We've got some, before we kind of transition topics here, we've got quite a few comments and questions that are very poignant and entertaining in the live YouTube chat. One is just to give us a little laugh that's not really Bowling centered, I guess. But Sam Turner II says, "I figured Randall, your boy behind you there, John, represents our offensive line skeleton crew." Thought that was a good one.
It represents Andy Dalton by like week 4.
Yeah, Christopher Higdon, Glenn at left tackle, Westerman at left guard, Price at center, Miller at right guard. Oh God, please no at right tackle. I like that. We can't even say his name. So, I'm looking at other. I'm seeing a lot of talk of Westerman and Michael Jordan, and I think that's probably where we want to go to next on this topic, and maybe how we tie a bow on this. We've talked so much this offseason about what's this offensive line going to look like, and now we continue to revisit this conversation because of what happened to Jonah Williams, what is now occurring with Clint Boling. So we need to keep talking about what's this going to look like, how are these guys going to fare. I guess kind of a 2-part question. Who do you think steps in at left guard, and who is the best option at left guard for the team at this point?
I think right now it's technically a three-horse race between Westerman, Jerry, and Hopkins. I remember reading on Bengals.com that Hopkins was getting like the second team looks behind Westerman towards the latter part of camp and OTAs. But Jerry's the one guy that has played under Jim Turner before, and I think that he's you want to talk about like life comes at you fast in the NFL in good ways and bad ways. And for Jerry, it was definitely a good way because this time last season he was still looking for a team to play for. He watched the entire 2018 season on his couch. Next thing you know, he gets a call from the Bengals, goes from a potential camp body to a potential starter. So that's going from 0 to 100 real quick for John Jerry, and I don't think that we can necessarily count him out yet. And because of that, I would give him pretty equal odds, along with a guy like Westerman and Hopkins. But I think Westerman's their clear best option there because of what we've seen from him. He's still pretty young at 26 years old. Again, only 183 snaps, but most of them have been high quality. Don't know exactly what Jerry's going to be like now after sitting down for a whole year. And even at his peak, he was still like an average player at best. And me personally, I prefer Hopkins at center more than guard, which is kind of rare for anyone to say about an interior lineman. But I think Westerman is definitely the best option, and he's going to get the first crack at it. But I definitely wouldn't count out a guy like Jerry or even Hopkins either because he's back and he's obviously got, in good faith with the organization as well.
For me, this situation is going to be one of the first true signals. Well, maybe not first true signals, but it is going to be a true signal to show us just how much different Zach Taylor is from Marvin Lewis. You mentioned John Jerry. There's the comfort level there. He's the veteran. He's played a lot of games in the NFL. That is a Marvin Lewis guy. Let's get the guy that we know. Let's have him be a Band-Aid there and continue to let a guy like Westerman rot on the bench. Let Jordan develop. To me, I think your best move is probably to play Westerman. Maybe I am almost of the preference to play Michael Jordan. He's young.
Really?
Yeah, he's young. There's probably a lot of work to do there, but you drafted him for a reason. You like him for a reason. He's athletic. He will be playing next to a guy he played with in college for a couple of years or a year at least in Billy Price. So I don't know. I guess I'm just I'm high on that kid, and I'm curious to see what he will do in the NFL. But to me, that's the situation. Are you going to go the old school Marvin Lewis, Mike Brown route, go John Jerry and stick with the veteran, or are you going to let these young guys play the guys who haven't had a lot of chances or the rookie in Jordan? To me, I think you have to go with the young guys, and you have to figure out, especially in this first year where the leash will have a little more room on Zach Taylor as opposed to a year or two down the road when he has to figure out, you got to start figuring this stuff out. You got to figure out who's going to stay here. Someone said it in the live YouTube chat. You have to figure out who's going to stay here for the long term now. And especially at that position. And to me, didn't they move up to draft Jordan? Or didn't they?
Yeah, they did
trade picks to move up to him. So they obviously liked him. I think he's young. I think there's a lot of development still to be had there. But
you want to talk about development? Like they were talking about like how I think they view him long term as a center. And they were like saying that they were going to keep him at center so he can focus on snapping, which like he was still having trouble snapping the ball, which is like, okay, this is Billy Price 2.0. You can draft another center from Ohio State and he can't necessarily snap out a shotgun or whatever. But Jordan would definitely be interesting there. I do agree though that he's extremely raw and probably not ready to start just yet. But I like him more as a guard than a center based off the film that we saw from Ohio State. And if they end up giving him backup reps at guard while that competition is still going on, I think would be best for him. Unfortunately, I think he's only going to stay as center, though, which I don't think would be good for him and the type of player that he is.
Yeah, there's one last quick spot on this. And we received a text on it earlier today, I think, and I think it was from Dan in Tennessee. And then there's another commenter in the live YouTube chat, Chance White, kind of talking about Dalton and how this whole thing affects Dalton, how the offensive line play will affect Dalton. Do you see that, there might be some slight improvements on this line, depending on how you look at it. If Billy Price plays at a higher level, you improve right guard play, maybe in whatever possibility. Bobby Hart improves play. I don't know. But basically, Dalton has been behind a pretty poor line, like you said, in 2016 and 2017 especially. It was not that great last year either. So now you lose two of your best offensive linemen. Do you see Dalton playing at more of the same level? Do you see it? How do you see this affecting him?
Well, for me, it's not necessarily as much Dalton as it is for Zach Taylor, because over the past couple of years, when the offensive line hasn't been that good, I think we've seen some slight growth from Dalton to be able to kind of do things on his own when the protection breaks down, just from experience and just having to deal with it constantly. The thing that hasn't improved, I think, from a play caller's perspective, is how to scheme around it and to try to take, try to not make it as big of an issue as it is. And I think that's going to be completely on Brian Callahan and Zach Taylor to try to scheme around a sub-average offensive line, because the thing with the McVay system is that it's built first and foremost off of a fantastic offensive line. We haven't seen it under some piss poor conditions like we could see it in Cincinnati. So the amount of play action usage, the amount of rollouts, the amount of moving pockets, the more that they can do to try to mitigate this potential problem, the better. And I think that's more on Zach Taylor and I guess his relationship with Andy Dalton and to what input Dalton could have in alleviating the problem in itself. But I think at this point, we kind of know who Dalton is up against, immense amount of pressure, and he's probably not going to be better than what he is right now. But it's more passable than it was early on in his career. And I think the main spotlight needs to go on Taylor and Callahan and that duo, kind of mitigating around the problem and try to not make it as big of an issue as it is.
Totally agree on the Taylor effect. I just wonder if this is now an embedded excuse for more, if Dalton stays at that mediocre, maybe into the above average-ish area. I just wonder if this is an embedded excuse by the club that says, oh, well, we lost two of our top offensive linemen last year, blah, blah, blah. We'll have to see. Long season ahead still. But it's coming up on us quickly. Training camp is just a couple of weeks away. This is the Orange and Black Insider Bengals podcast. He's John Sheeran. I'm Anthony Cosenza. We appreciate you joining us on a different day and time this week. We kind of switched the schedule around, and I have to publicly thank John. I've really jerked him around with the scheduling lately, so I appreciate his flexibility and, of course, that of all of our listeners. You can get this show on iTunes, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play, on Megaphone. You can get all of our material on cincyjungle.com. And then you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel and get our videos there where you can, in case you haven't had the pleasure of seeing Randall yet, you'll be able to see see what he's all about. John, for the past couple of episodes, we have done the Bengals potential breakout players. Let me try that again. We have been doing 2019 potential Bengals breakout players. And so far, I believe I have. I had Billy Price last week, I know, and you had last week Alex Erickson, correct?
Yes.
And your other, remind me again, was
Samuel Hubbard.
Okay, that's right. And I am trying to remember who I had for my first one there.
That was Jermaine Pratt.
Thank you. That's right. I knew I'd keep you around for a good reason, my friend. So yes, Jermaine Pratt and Billy Price for me, Sam Hubbard and Alex Erickson for you. So we could either shape this around the news of Clint Boling coming, that came out this week, or obviously you have free reign to choose whoever you want, my friend. But who is another potential Bengals breakout player for you in 2019?
Christian Westerman. No, I'm just kidding. I mean, he's probably a breakout player, but for the sake of doing something different, I was thinking of Darius Phillips. And there's some logic against it, I guess, because of how crowded that cornerback room is right now, because you brought back Darqueze Dennard, you brought in B.W. Webb on a multi-year extension, the guy who's familiar with Lou Anarumo and his scheme and his coaching abilities. So you have to figure, like the wide receiver room, the top four are set. And that kind of leaves Darius Phillips in some sort of weird purgatory in terms of what his long-term potential and impact could be. because now he's competing with guys like Devontae Harris, who was drafted along with him last year in the 5th round, Jordan Brown, who's a new guy there, and then you have to figure he's probably in that group of who's going to round out that room, and whether they keep 5, 6, or 7 of those guys. But I like what Phillips showed last year, and I think the amount of playing time that he got amidst the injuries that Dennard had towards the middle of the season, I think that was crucial for him and his growth and development. Because for starting off, he was really shaky, more of a tackler than a cover, not a guy that you would trust in man-to-man situations. But I look back to his college tape. I just watched randomly the other day, and I forgot about how much of a ball magnet this guy was. And I think he was a former receiver at Western Michigan, similar to a guy like Jordan Brown, just a guy that got hands on a lot of balls. And he was more of a boundary corner in Western Michigan up against, obviously smaller competition, but the guy just has ball skills. And I think that's something that obviously you are very adamant on the Bengals lacking in the secondary. And it's an asset that I think that he can provide. And, for cornerbacks, it takes them a while to kind of get into a groove in the league and kind of find themselves. But I think not only as a cornerback, but also a returner, something that he was very underutilized last year because they kind of just played it safe with Alex Erickson. But I think there's potential with him just being a more explosive option as a returner. And I think having that in his back pocket should give him an advantage to not only make the final roster, but to be active on game days and potentially make an impact as a cornerback. So you have 2 guys in the slot that you're comfortable with in Dennard and Webb. And I think it gives Phillips more of a chance to be who he was best at in college as sort of a boundary corner, and gives him an option behind a William Jackson or Drake or Patrick if, God forbid, one of those guys goes down. And his ability to play off coverage at a high level, read quarterback's eyes, and just find the ball, which is something that Bengals cornerbacks have had such a difficult issue doing. So it may not happen in 2019, but I think this is a good chance for him to really establish himself as a true boundary corner and someone who's more than just a sure tackle, but a guy who can cover and bump and run situations, but also can be an explosive return guy. So Darius Phillips is my guy this week.
So do you see him with your emergence of with your nomination of Alex Erickson, and then now you're nominating Darius Phillips? Are you saying that you see Alex Erickson because of a potential increased role on offense? You maybe see a way in for Darius Phillips to be an effective return man. No more Adam Jones. All these other guys are gone. Maybe Alex Erickson, they don't want him getting injured on return opportunities because he's going to be valuable on offense. Do you see then that's the door that Darius Phillips walks into to be an effective player for this team this year?
Yeah, it's kind of like the cause and effect thing. Like if Erickson's more used on offense, they're less likely to use him more as a return man. But he's always a solid one to kind of fall back on if Phillips suffers an injury or just whatever. If they just need a solid return from the punt or kickoff unit, Erickson's probably your guy. But to have Phillips, who again would be the 5th or 6th cornerback, there's less risk with him getting hurt in those situations. But there's potentially a greater reward because he's just more of an explosive athlete. And honestly, in college, he was really damn good at it, and that's why I was so confident that he was going to take that job. But eventually, Marvin Lewis stick with the guy more than the guy you don't. So he never really got that chance. But I do think that if Erickson is more involved in offense and is asked to play more snaps there, he's less liable or less likely to be more of a prominent kick return man, which then gives Darius Phillips more of an opportunity there.
Yep, good choice there. I also was tempted to go with offensive line this week because of all this news. That could happen, but I went with offensive line last time, and I still think there's just a lot of murkiness there. So it's hard to just go out on a limb and choose somebody else there. But I'm probably gonna catch hell for this from our listeners or whoever else. But oh well, I'm gonna go with Drew Sample. I think that Drew Sample is going to be a movable piece in this offense. I think he's going to be a guy that helps out with blocking. I think he's going to be a security blanket for Andy Dalton. And I think now with blocking potentially being even more of an issue with Clint Boling, I think there's going to be a lot of short passes to a guy like Drew Sample. I think he may line up at H-back. I think he can help out in the run game. I think he's just going to be a Swiss Army knife type of guy. And I think he's going to do it better and probably become the guy that the team wanted Ryan Hewitt to be when they tried to use him. Ryan Hewitt was an H-back and tight end in college at Stanford, and the Bengals tried to use him. They valued him as a blocker. I mean, he was basically playing a fullback type of position at 6'5". And then they signed him to a pretty lucrative contract, and then they never gave him the ball. So, and then they ended up cutting him, which, that whole sequence of events was very odd to me. But I think that this kid, with these offensive minds now in Cincinnati, I think that that's who this kid is going to become. I think he will help out as a blocker in the run game. I think he will help out as maybe a chip tight end, a block chip, go off and get a short route and a catch. I think he will move the chains. I think his role will also be very important because we don't know what the health will be with Tyler Eifert, and not only in terms of if he'll stay healthy the entire year, but if the Bengals will have him on a pitch count type of thing, and if he'll only become a niche player because he continues to get hurt. So, maybe Sample is a guy who is a little bit more, to use a football term, a between the 20s type of guy, whereas Eifert is more of the red zone. So maybe Eifert gets a little bit more love and the big plays for touchdowns. But I think this kid will move the chains. I think he will be a critical third down option. I think he's going to be, like I said, a security blanket for Andy Dalton as blocking potentially becomes an issue. And as I think you'll see him have an impact right away because, like I said, he's going to be a guy that'll do these short routes, little dump offs, that sort of thing. And this offense is going to be trying to find the rhythm in a new system with new coaches and a lot of new players on it. I think Drew Sample has the ability to become a potential breakout player. I'm not saying he's going to be a Pro Bowl guy, but I think we're going to sit here. We may in November look back to April and say, man, we really bitched about this guy being a draft pick, and now look at him. I think that's obviously the hope. I don't guarantee it, but I could see this guy having a decent niche in the offense.
Call it a dumb coincidence, but if the Bengals are going to make a risky draft pick, it might as well be in the second round because you just see the most success there. Now, sans long-term Jeremy Hill and God bless him, Jake Fisher, they just had dumb luck there. They've just had the opportunity to draft guys who can contribute immediately, whether it be Joe Mixon on offense or Jesse Bates starting at safety, but Sample's going to get the snaps required to see what type of player they have in year one. And I think just who he is more important than who he isn't in terms of what impact that he can make. And that's just a very good blocker, very good athlete for his size. And when he's been targeted in an offense and has had accurate balls thrown to him, he's been able to make an impact as a receiver. So I think he's going to have a chance to prove to be a better player than what many of us thought he was. I'm not entirely comfortable drafting him in the second round because I think there was just better tight ends available before he was drafted. But for what he's going to be asked to do and what potential impact he can have with, a tight end room that's led by Tyler Eifert, I think there's definite chance for a better justification of that pick. And just for their history of what they had in the second round, it's probably not the worst possible case scenario that we could have asked for, I guess.
Yeah, I think the optimist in me says he didn't get enough opportunities in college and that affected his statistics. And then you have to look at the fact that this is a guy that they feel fits their scheme. And they feel that what he brings, be it as a blocker, be it as a movable piece, they think that he can be effective in a variety of different ways. And obviously he's for all of the bad news that has recently come the Bengals' way, especially on offense, he has been the constant guy that has been good news, has been giving everybody good news based on his performances in camp. Hopefully he stays healthy and the team can use him in effective ways. We're going to get out of here, but before we do, I have to remind you to get the show how you can. iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play. You can get it on Megaphone. You can get it on YouTube and CincyJungle.com. We appreciate the support. Subscribe to our channels and get all of our programming how you can. John, any final thoughts before we cruise on out of here?
Randall, you got anything? No, no, I think we're good. We're good.
Do I see a fireplace in your new digs there? Is that what that is?
It's not entirely real or practical in any sense of the word. We have like 3 fake chimneys in this house, and it's all for show.
I can just picture you in like a robe with like a glass of wine, just talking Bengals.
Probably
Letting the fire roar in the background. Just
it would
really
probably be like a liquor in there. Be more of an evil. I need like a little cat. Yeah,
cognac or something.
yeah, something like that.
Well, welcome, Randall, and thanks, John, for being flexible this week. And enjoy your trip, my friend. And we'll catch up with you next week. As
You
I'm
as well,
sure,
man.
thanks. I'm sure there'll probably be some more news that occurs that we will need to cover, as is usually the case with the Bengals. And when we do return, I think we're a few days, if not maybe a week away from training camp at that point. So we will have quite a bit to talk about next week's episode. And so, but to all of our listeners, we do have a number of different items on our channels in terms of listener questions and our show and all kinds of different things. So I think I've kind of teased this a little bit. Aside from bringing on guests, especially during training camp or whatnot, we'll be doing kind of some fantasy football stuff, some news and notes stuff. We're going to try. John is going to be at training camp, so we'll probably get the the bird's eye view there from the horse's mouth, and we'll talk about that. So keep it to our channel, subscribe how you can. Thanks for joining us with the schedule switch. We'll see you next time. This has been the Orange and Black Insider.